DurchBurch!
DurchBurch! DurchBurch! DurchBurch! It's been over a year since The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild came out, and I know I've griped and gushed about it a lot during my streams, but it's finally time for me to critique it. In this video, I'll be going over my 20 biggest issues with the game. And now I'd like to state that while these are all opinions I hold, they're just that, opinions. If you hold a different opinion or something, that's fair, but it's also important to remember that I'm not stating these as fact. Regardless, I feel that some of these are big issues that Nintendo should address in future titles. I mean, some of them might appear very minor, but you get the point, some of them are gonna be big. Anyway, let's get started. The bombs in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild they bore me. I don't know what it is. The games with similar art styles, with like cel-shaded looks, they always have these beautiful bomb explosions. And, I mean, the bomb arrow explosions in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild are great. They have this massive sense of impact, and the flames and the smoke and everything. It's good. It's so good. But then when you use the bomb runes, they just feel like they don't have that impact. You know, it just goes a little whoosh, a little blue kaboom, and then stun. And it's not that entertaining. It's not that much of a spectacle, and it's not that impressive. I just feel like the bombs in this game could be better. That's about it. The moblin design in this game, it strikes me as weird. Moblins are normally like these burly, intimidating pig monsters. They're like mini Ganons, you know? Like, you see a moblin and you're like, oh wow, that's a thing. But these ones, they're so lanky and doofy, and that single little unicorn horn on top, it doesn't help. They don't look like moblins to me. Whereas the bokoblins and Lizalfos, they still are clearly bokoblins and Lizalfos. But the moblins, if I saw them not knowing that it was a moblin, I don't think I would assume that that was a moblin. I might assume that it's a new type of enemy. So one of the weirder things about the overworld of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is that while it's the biggest and most expansive and fun to explore overworld, it doesn't really have caves. Like, it has caves, they're little scoops out of the walls, but Zelda's had a staple of these massive hidden caves, or not even massive, but just cave-like caves, you know, in Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, A Link to the Past. All of these games, they just have cave systems. Twilight Princess especially had these intricate tunnel networks of caves. And you'd think for a game that was worked on in part by Monolith Soft, that they would have had someone say, hey, you can do these really cool cave systems, like what they had in Xenoblade Chronicles X. You know, it just feels like the caves in this game are just unnatural and underloved. They don't really feel like caves. Another issue I have is that Link is just characterless and bland in this game. Like, all of his development about him, all the information we get about him comes from side notes rather than from himself. Like, I get that he's not a spoken character, that he's silent most of the time, other than his, you know, and you know, all that stuff. But he has so much less personality than Skyward Sword, but yet, in this game, he's his own character. He gets his own name. But yet, he's less of a character than in the last game, when you could still change his name because he was just a representation of you. Alright, this one, whew, it's a bit hotly debated. I feel that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has too little music. To me, the music is just intermittent, and it comes in and out, and there are times when it's just not there. And it's way too ambient. Like, all of the music is just ambient. Well, not all of it, but you know, you get the point. Like, most of the exploration music you're going to be getting is just these ambient, like, piano, you know, tips and taps, and it dulls the sense of adventure. There are so few memorable tracks from this game, and the best music is left in the trailers. Like, at least Skyward Sword's Battle of the Goddess shows up in-game. But the main theme of Breath of the Wild shows up at the opening cutscene. Like, of course, the opening cutscene might have a bit more, but what I want is, you know, I want something memorable. I want something that's going to leave an impact on me from my OST. You know, like Wind Waker has so many catchy themes. Twilight Princess has so many themes that are just still stuck into my head to this day. Skyward Sword's music was amazing. And then Breath of the Wild comes out and the music is mostly forgettable. Like, I can remember which tracks I particularly like, but I can't remember those tracks when I'm not listening to them actively. And that's not even an issue with, oh, well, you know, you haven't played this game as much as the others, or it's been less time. I've played over 100 hours. I've played 150 hours in my own game, and well more than that in the, you know, in the or not well more than that, but and another good chunk in the live stream save that I have, and I still can't remember most of the music from the game. Like, I know that I love the sound, like the song that plays when you're around one of the like towers, but I can't remember it, you know? Like, I know the song and I love that song, but I don't know how it goes. I can't imagine it in my head. I love the theme for Sidon. I can't remember it. Like, that's a problem when your music is so forgettable that someone can love some songs and not remember those songs. But if you look at the songs that I do remember from Breath of the Wild, I remember the main theme. I remember the music from that phenomenal Hyrule in Ruins trailer. Like, so good. It's just, there's not enough of that. The game is so musicless. Okay, here's one that I have griped about a lot in the live streams. So if you've seen the live streams, you know my opinion on this. I don't like that Zelda's alive. Like, think about it. It's been 100 years. She has been using magic to suppress Ganon for 100 years. How is she alive? And not even just alive, how does she still look the same? She hasn't aged at all. She hasn't withered in those 100 years of just concentrating magic. Like, if you look at the monks, you could say that they're magical. You know, they give you the spirit orbs. Like, they're holding on to those, and they are withered away because they're, you know, ancient people that are just barely alive, holding on by the scraps of magic that they're holding in those spirit orbs. But what does Zelda have? It's been 100 years of her channeling magic. Like, yes, you could argue, oh, well, the goddess Hylia was being channeled through her. But the goddess Hylia is dead. The goddess Hylia is reincarnated as a mortal in Zelda. In Skyward Sword, she's kept alive by freezing herself in a crystal for about 100 years. But she's frozen in a crystal. The crystal itself, a piece of magic that she's using to keep herself in a basically comatose state. Like, she's not aware. She's not functioning. She's not speaking outside of her mind. She's just frozen there in time. But in Breath of the Wild, she's just perfectly fine. She comes out with a few, you know, little patches of dust on her dress, but she's just Zelda as she was. She's alive, and it's been 100 years of her concentrating her magic on keeping Ganon from being alive and in a bodily state, but he was slowly winning that war. Like, I feel like it would have been a bit, like, a bit of a sad reveal, but a bigger reveal if it turned out that she was dead like the other champions, and she'd been, as a spirit, focusing her magic or something like that. I would have been fine with that. I think that would have been a great plot point, but I can't get over the fact that she's just alive. She's okay, she's fine, it's been 100 years, but she's good, she's cool, don't worry about it. In a somewhat related vein, I feel like the final boss in Breath of the Wild is just kind of bland and poorly executed. Like, if you finish the main body of the game beating all of the Divine Beasts, you're rewarded by not having to fight any of the 4 Ganon Blights before fighting Ganon himself, and you deal half of his health in damage. So, not only are you getting rewarded for not having to fight the other bosses in the game, but you're being rewarded by just nuking half of the final boss's health, the hardest part of the final boss, just nuking half of his health. Like, I would be fine if they'd picked one or the other, but instead they decided to just remove each of the mini-bosses ahead, basically, and then cut the health in half. And that just feels boring to me, that I was, like, if I want to enjoy the game to the fullest, get all the memories, beat the whole game, that the final boss is so dead and half-beaten. And then when you get to the beast form, it feels even more boring, because you just kind of ride around on a horse, or if you've beaten the DLC, the Master Cycle, and just kind of wait for weak spots to appear on the big, minimally threatening boss who just kind of stomps around the map. Like, each hit deals a ton of damage, but because he's just so big and slow and meandering and not scary at all, and he doesn't really react to most of the hits, except for, like, the last one, it doesn't feel satisfying. It's like, cool, okay, that glowy spot's gone, let's find another glowy spot. And you ride around, and there's a glowy spot, poof. Like, it doesn't feel like it has that impact until you get that last hit. Like, if you look at Ocarina of Time, the Beast Ganon fight, every time you hit him, and he's like, blah, blah, like, there's a reaction, there's something there. But Beast Ganon in Breath of the Wild just doesn't have that something. Like, it's such a cool design, and it feels so underwhelming that they didn't do more with it. Okay, this is another one that I would say is hotly debated, but I feel that the shrines in Breath of the Wild are just a bit tedious. Like, there's so many shrines, and so many of them are just kind of repetitive, or like, oh, this is a slightly harder version of that one, or that one's a slightly harder version of the one you did before, or this is the easy one because you did all the hard ones already. Like, it feels like, I don't know, it feels kind of bland, I feel like I'm overusing that word, but it feels like they're doing too much with the same concept. Like, some of the best shrines in the game are at the very start, when you get the runes, because each of those feels very natural, and its progression, it feels very interesting and fun, and the ones that you get with the Champions Ballad DLC, which are easily the best shrines in the game. They're phenomenal shrines, with so unique and so interesting, mechanics and puzzles. But other than that, shrines are basically just places you go, and you travel around the world, and then you go in, and you're just traveling the world to find the same place. Like, the architecture and aesthetic and the lighting, it's always the blue with the black blocky walls, and it just feels like every shrine is the same. Like, at least change the colors or something, like, oh, you're in the snowy area, so it's got light blue lighting or something. Oh, you're in Faron, so you got green lighting. Oh, you're in, Gerudo Desert. Okay, so you've got some, like, orange lighting. Like, have something that matches the area thematically or something. Change up that aesthetic a little bit. Maybe have some vines growing in the Faron shrines. Maybe have some, like, rocks lying around in the Goron area, like, around Eldin and the volcano and all of that. Like, have something to match the area you're in. Make it feel like you're not just in a shrine that's outside of the world, but rather make it feel like you're in a shrine inside the world you're in, if that makes sense. I feel like this game also has the least sense of development throughout the game. Now, there are the champion powers like Rivali's Gale, Daruk's Protection, and all that. Those are great. I think those are a fun way to have progress throughout the game, but there's nothing more than that. There are 4 points in the game when you feel like you've made some progress, really, in having more that you can do. But there's no, like, new items, no new runes, if you will. Like, in past Zelda games, every dungeon and every temple would give you more, items. You'd go in and be like, oh, I got the bow here, I got the boomerang here, I got the bombs here, or something like that. But other than that, that's it. Like, Breath of the Wild just gives you the runes at the start. I feel like if they'd had other, like, shrines or something that had new runes in them, like big, hard-to-get-through shrines, or not even hard-to-get-through shrines, but, like, unique shrines that give you the option to, you start off, and not give you the option, but, like, they give you a new rune. Like, you start off, you enter the shrine, and there's a rune, like, a rune terminal there. And you get a new rune. Like, I feel like that could have been a really interesting and engaging mechanic. Because the best part of a Zelda game is that you can kind of go back and see a new area and be like, oh, I have this item now. I know what I'm supposed to do here. You know, you could see a spot that you're like, there's some vines there in Twilight Princess, but like, how do I get to those vines? Well, you get there when you get the claw shot, or get the double claw shot. You know, they give you a hint of, this is what you can do at some point. You can do this. You just can't do it yet. And so, as you progress through the game, you eventually get that ability to do it. Like, if you look at other, you know, relatively open-world Nintendo titles, you look at things like Metroid. And the Metroid series is notorious for that, where you go to new areas. Like, it's a linear process of getting to new areas, but it doesn't feel as linear because you have one path that you can go down, but oh, now you got this. You can use that to go down this other path that you saw earlier in this other place. And so you go back to that place, you go down that path, and wow, the world is so much bigger than you thought. Like, that is something they could have done in Breath of the Wild by giving you new runes. Like, if they had a rune that was like the hookshot or the clawshot rune, you know, like the grapple rune, or something like that, and you could use that to get to places that you couldn't have gotten to before, or as easily, I feel like that could have just been a much more engaging and fun way to navigate this world. Horse armor sets in Breath of the Wild are pretty much useless. The only armor that does anything is the one from the DLC. You know, the one where when you whistle, your horse warps to you, rather than having a range that it can work at. It works globally. It's like, oh, I need a horse here, whistle, horse appears. Like, that's a cool and unique thing, but none of the armor sets do anything else. They're all just aesthetic changes. The monster armor on your horse is useless. A lot of people that I know kind of hoped, like, oh, maybe I can use this, put it on a stall horse, and keep that. Because if I put it on a stall horse, it won't die in the morning or something when the sunlight hits it, because it's covered in this armor. It's called the monster armor. Come on, you gotta use it on a monster. But then it doesn't work that way, and it doesn't do anything. It's just an aesthetic change, and it's kind of an ugly one at that. And that's how all of the armor sets feel. It's like, yes, you can put armor on things, but there's not really enough types to make it an engaging horse customization experience to put armor on them, especially when the armor just doesn't do anything. Alright, this is when we're starting to hit some of the larger issues I have with the game. Like, I feel that there are too few enemies in Breath of the Wild. Now, there's a lot of enemy diversity, but they're all within the same groups of enemies. Like, there's not that many types. Like, there's 3 primary enemy types, and they're everywhere, and that's the Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos. But they took out so many of the of the staples of the series, being things like Tektites, Skulltulas, Redead, Bubbles, Stau Children, Staufos, you know. Like, sure, yes, there are Stau Bokoblins, Stau Moblins, and Stau Lizalfos, but those are just the same 3 enemy types, but when you hit them, they fall apart. Like, there's no uniqueness to them. It's not a unique fight when you fight a Stau Hinox versus a Hinox. Yeah, there's a little bit of difference, but it's not a unique enemy type, really. It's just another Hinox with these powers. You know, it's just another Bokoblin with these powers. And that doesn't feel engaging or fun to me to be fighting the same 3 types of enemies with just so many different versions of them that people think that they're unique enemies. Like, the Divine Beasts are populated with just the Guardian Scouts, like the mini-Guardians, and the Floating Skull enemies. Why do they have Floating Skull enemies and not have Bubbles? Because they're not Bubbles. No one can call them Bubbles, because they're just Bokoblin heads, Lizalfos heads, and Moblin heads. That's not a Bubble. It's a floaty skull. Like, I want a bubble. Give me my bubbles. I want my skulls with little wings that flutter around, or just their skulls with smoky flames and go, whoa, you know? Like, I want those back. I want bubbles. Bubbles were a fun design, and they're a staple in the series, and yet you just remove them and replace them with the same thing you'd replace Stalfos and Stowchildren with, but just the head, and it's a one-hit kill. It's not engaging, it's not fun, and it's not unique. There's not much plot development in the DLC for Breath of the Wild. Like, the first set was just some bonus content to make the world a bit more fun. Okay, that's reasonable. It added in Master Mode, it added in the Trial of the Sword. That was fun. But there's not really more plot development, especially in Champion's Ballad. You get some more backstory for the characters in the past, but that doesn't really have that much impact, especially the outcome of the plot, or rather, the outcome of the DLC. It has like no impact if you've already beaten the game, because even though they'd said it takes place after the main game, they apparently meant that the main game ends when you finish the Divine Beasts, and that the final boss fight isn't the main game. And because the DLC doesn't pick up where the ending left off, you've already beaten it, you've already seen the ending, you know what happens, you've finished it, and then now you're just getting some stuff that helps you to finish it, but you've already done that. It doesn't feel right, and it feels kind of awkward if you're just going into the game, you know, you've just beaten a Divine Beast, and suddenly you're able to go to that Divine Beast, or rather, like, you beat a Divine Beast, and a new structure rises up, and shows you where some shrines are, you go to those shrines, and then you go back to the Divine Beast and fight the boss you just fought again. Like, it doesn't feel right. Like, the Champion's Ballad only feels good if you've done it a bit after you've done the other Divine Beasts, but also before you beat the game. So it's not in this really easy, natural spot, and it doesn't feel good. And because it's kind of thrown in right there, and there's not really more plot, there's just more backstory, it doesn't feel like it progresses plot. It just feels like additional content, which is what it is. But it's supposed to be story content, and just adding a little bit more backstory isn't as engaging as adding some plot, especially in a game so light on plot and so high in backstory. So the next issue here is that the ending is just kind of weak. Like, you've saved the day, and so there's kind of a cliffhanger, but there's not much impact in it at all. Like, you get there, cliffhanger, and then it's just like, oh, finally some impact, but then you don't get that impact. Like, it's just like, oh, we're gonna rebuild Hyrule. Like, it doesn't call back to other characters, it doesn't harken back to them. The biggest impact is from the climax when all of the champions fire off their death beams and hit Ganon. There's not much there, though, to really make the ending itself, like that resolution to the plot, have impact. And also, just, once again, why is Zelda alive? Why can't she just be dead? Just let her be dead. If she was dead, it would be a better ending. So I feel that Breath of the Wild has too little plot. The memories aren't really enough for me to consider them plot. It's backstory. And backstory isn't plot. Backstory is just plot that takes place before the current plot. But if there's not really any current plot, the backstory doesn't provide much context to any current plot. Like, the plot that is present is pretty weak and predictable once you've done one Divine Beast. It's just, oh, okay, so I'm going to... Like, rather, you'll notice the pattern after the second one, but once you've done one Divine Beast, you've seen the plot for all of them. You find someone somehow related to the previous champion in some way, shape, or form. And you work with them, you get on the Divine Beast. You beat the Divine Beast, you talk with the champion gives you a power, and then they're like, alright, I'm gonna wait, and their Divine Beast moves into position. That's the plot. That's all the plot there is. It's like, okay, meet descendant kind of person, maybe not a descendant in some cases, but like most of the time it's a descendant. You know, work with them, get to the Divine Beast, do the Divine Beast, resolve, oh, yep, this person's dead, thought so, okay, carry on, I've got a power, hi, descendant person, I'm back, and I did good. Like, that's the plot that happens each time, and it's like, you've done one, you've done them all. And also, I would say that exploration isn't plot. I'm just gonna throw that out there right now. Like, being able to explore a world is not plot. It's exploration. exploration and plot can be intertwined, but in this game they're not. Just want to make sure that's noted. Alright, and another point on Breath of the Wild, there's no real plot twist. Like, there's no plot twist. And one of the best parts of any Zelda game is the plot twist. And I think it's one of those conventions that The Legend of Zelda has grown to have that I think is worth keeping. And I feel like it can be done without falling into that classic structure of you do a few early dungeons or temples, plot twist, villain might not be the villain you thought, or something like that, you know, some level of plot twist, and then you do more dungeons or temples, and then you fight the final boss. Like, I feel like they could have done a plot twist where it's like, even after the fact, like if they'd done like DLC that took place after the main game, and it's like, plot twist, Ganon was actually trying to get a body to fight something off that was a greater threat that wanted the Triforce or something. Because we all know, Ganon loves having the Triforce. That's what he wants. He wants to get the whole Triforce. So if there was something that was a bigger threat that also wanted the Triforce, he would fight that threat because he wants to get the Triforce. You know, it would be kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my ally kind of thing. Like, if that had been his motivation, like, he's like, there's a bigger threat than me, I want to protect the Triforce as much as you do, so that I can steal it from you someday. We need to fight this thing off. And if it turns out that, like, you seal him, and then, as you're sealing him, he's like, you fools, something is coming. And then the DLC comes out, and that something comes. Like, if they, you know, made that whole game you did up until then, was just the first act of a Zelda game, that would have been amazing. You know, give you that plot twist. Because then you've played a whole game. Like, people will all agree, Breath of the Wild is a full game. So you play that full game. You enjoy that full game. And then you get to the end, and it turns out that was the first half. That was the first act of the typical 2-act formula, but done in a way that is so different. It's like if the first act of The Legend of Zelda and Majora's Mask, or Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, was Ocarina of Time. And then Majora's Mask was that second act after a plot twist. It's like, that would be a phenomenal way to do it, but it's not how they did it. Like, you can put the plot twist in, and have it still not follow that traditional Zelda structure that they've been trying to avoid in Breath of the Wild. Alright, here's one that I find quite, it takes away from the game. is the easiest way to put it. And that's that there's so few memorable characters. There's the champions and their modern counterparts, and then a few other major characters like Impa, you know, characters like Beetle, and stuff like that. But most of the other side characters are just kind of shafted in their uniqueness of design, because they all feel the same. They all feel like they just were randomly generated with a set of features and skin tones, and then put into the areas that they belonged in. So there's not really many unique characters. And I've heard some people go, oh yeah, that's because you need the world to feel like it's populated and natural. And I'm like, well, if you play like Twilight Princess, there's a lot of really unique character designs in each town. The only place with like characters you're not going to really remember the faces of is Hyrule itself, like Hyrule Castle Town, where all of the characters that you're seeing there are these, you know, relatively just, they're random. They're the most minor of minor characters, and they're the characters you're not going to be able to be like, oh, okay, that's that guy. I know his face. I know his body shape. I know his eyes or whatever. Like, every character in Wind Waker feels super unique, but like none of the characters in Breath of the Wild, other than the most important ones, feel like they have that same level of uniqueness. And it makes a lot of them just kind of forgettable, and that's a problem. Alrighty, I kind of touched on this a little bit when I was talking about the bomb runes, but I feel like runes themselves were a boring idea. Like, they're kind of an underwhelming thing, the way they're presented visibly and audibly, which I mentioned especially as an issue with the bombs, but it's an issue with all of the runes to differing degrees. I also don't think they're an adequate replacement for the items in past games, especially because you get them all at the start. And as a result of getting them all at the start, they just kind of get old very quickly. especially things like the Cryonis Rune. The Cryonis Rune is probably the most boring rune in the game. It's the Sand Rod, but for ice. It's like, well, look at that, you made an ice block. But it's like a weaker version of the Sand Rod, but for ice. And I don't think that's a fun or engaging mechanic, you know? To just have, oh, make an ice block, you can climb it, there you go. Ice block. Cryonis Rune. It's not that engaging, it's not that fun. I feel like the Stasis Rune can be fun, but it's not a super... Like, it's a neat mechanic, but I don't feel like it has much visible impact. I'd say it's one of the better ones audibly. Magnesis Rune as well. It's pretty decent audibly, like that snap when you connect to something is nice. But all in all, the runes are just kind of boring. Like, I feel like getting things that were like unique items and stuff felt way better than starting the game off with all these runes. Like, even when it wasn't used in that many areas, the spinner was a better item than any of the runes in Breath of the Wild are runes, in my opinion. Like, Twilight Princess's spinner is just better. And it's usable in like 1 or 2 places. The Dominion Rod is probably the only item I can think of in Zelda that isn't as good as some of the runes in Breath of the Wild. That's a problem. It's a problem when you get all of the runes at the start, and they're all something that's gotten old by the end of the game. Alright, here's an issue that once again is kind of debatable. I feel like there's not enough dungeons and shrines and stuff. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, the shrines are dungeons. Or, you know, they're what the dungeons are in the game. I don't know, I don't feel like they are. Because dungeons and temples, they have a boss, you know? And the early ones are usually kind of fun and simple. They feel like they have some connection to the area they're in. But there's nothing really like that. And I feel like dungeons and temples allow for easy plot building, and I don't think that the Divine Beasts did a good job of that. Especially because the dungeons are an opportunity for fun bosses. You know, if you look at like the starting ones in games, like you see like Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, they've got Goma and Goma. You know, very unique designs and unique fighting methods, pretty much. But they're still like, you know, Gomas. And they're both fun designs. You know, the crazy, like, spidery dude, the freaking lava scorpion centipede thing, like, they make it fun. And they have these really intricate boss designs for relatively early game bosses. Like, you can just run into the game and just fight all of these bosses in a day. And be like, yeah. And have that sense of accomplishment. That you might not want to run into the late game and fight all those bosses, but you want to fight those early ones every time. They're always engaging, they're always memorable. And I feel like that's something that's kind of just lacking in Breath of the Wild. The fact that there isn't that, you know, dungeon boss, temple boss kind of thing at the start of the game that's just kind of fun. And there's also just not enough other than the Divine Beasts, which are kind of just bland, and I'm going to get to that in the next point. The temples in Breath of the Wild are too similar. The architecture in every Divine Beast is pretty much the same. The structure is also pretty much just the same. You get the map, you go to the 5 terminals, go to the big terminal, you fight the boss, you talk to the spooky ghost guy. That's it. That is the structure of every Divine Beast. Now, I love the Divine Beast's puzzle mechanics. I think it's great, that idea of just moving the whole temple. That's so cool. But the rest of the temple's lame. Like, the idea of moving the temple around and manipulating it is super fun and super engaging, and every time it has that wow factor of just watching the temple shift to the way as you told it to. But other than that, it's just, you know, they're bland. There's nothing going on. They're boring. They're unseasoned. Like, their biggest difference is the skybox difference. Like, that's the aesthetic difference. Look at that, there's a different skybox here. This one's a lake. This was at the sky. This one's in the desert. Like, it's like the skybox is the biggest change when it comes to aesthetics. Alrighty, and here's the biggest one. This is the complaint I will always hold as my biggest issue with Breath of the Wild. before the DLC, before Champion's Ballad, all you fight is Ganons. There's the 4 Ganon Blights, then there's the Ganon, and then there's the Beast Ganon. Like, that's it. That's all it is. It's just Ganon, 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 Ganon. Like, what is that? That is not a set of fun bosses. Like, I love the art style of this game. I want to see classic bosses like Goma, or even a Dodongo, or like, you know, a new boss. Because new bosses are one of my favorite things about every Zelda game. You know, a new Zelda comes out and I'm like, man, I want to see the new bosses. Like, Skyward Sword disappointed me because Girahim was the final boss of, like, what, 3 dungeons/temples? Like, that's kind of lame. I want more than that. I want to be able to go into a game and be like, oh wow, look at this unique and engaging boss that I haven't fought before. Wow, I didn't expect to fight a giant, you know, cursed Goron. Oh, I didn't expect to fight Yetta. Like, like I wanna fight engaging and interesting and surprising and cool bosses. Morpheal from Twilight Princess. I'm bringing up Twilight Princess a lot, and that's just because it has really fun bosses. The bosses in Phantom Hourglass, too, that make use of the hardware so well. Like, those are memorable and fun bosses. The bosses in Wind Waker are so fun and flashy looking and beautiful. You know, Ocarina of Time's got like Bongo Bongo, like these big and intimidating and memorable bosses, but because every boss just looks like Ganon the pirate, you know, with a weapon for one hand and a hand for the other hand, like it's boring. It's not enough. They don't do enough boss design to make the game engaging and fun. Where is the diversity in the bosses? Every boss is just, it's the same boss with a different way he fights. Every time. They make the same noises, they look the same, they've got the same textures. They just, it's oh, Ganon Blight, it's the Wind Blight, oh, it's the Water Blight, oh, it's the Thunder Blight, oh, look, it's the Fire Blight. Like, it feels weak to me. It feels boring, uninspired. Like, I would have been fine if they were, like, in a traditional Zelda game, the second act bosses. Like, if they had unique bosses for the first act, and then it's like, oh, plot twist, Ganon's taken over the Divine Beasts. What? And then it's like, oh, I have to fight each of these pieces of Ganon that's in a Divine Beast. I'm like, that could be an interesting way to do it. I feel like Breath of the Wild, to sum up my issues with it, I feel like Breath of the Wild tried too hard to break from the mold that past Zelda games have made, but didn't make a game that would... But they ended up making a game that would be better if it followed that mold. Especially plot-wise. Because getting back to the idea that memories aren't plot, they made the game feel like you would rather live in the memories. I would rather have lived in the memories of this game and done stuff there than I would have played this game. Like, if I played through the memories, I would have been happier than I am having played through the game. And that's a problem that happens when you have too much backstory with not enough story. And that's a problem when all of your bosses are the same. But easily, you could have done something that took place in the past with unique bosses. Like, show Link's rise to power with unique bosses. Have the plot twist happen. Oh, now you're fighting Ganon Blights. Like, do something. Please. Please, make the game feel unique and engaging and inspired. And I feel like that's where Breath of the Wild missed the mark. It didn't feel unique enough, engaging enough, inspired enough. But anyways, that's just my issues with this game. And once again, I'd like to reiterate, if you've gotten to this point, these are all opinions. None of these are facts. None of these are guarantees. These are just issues that I personally have with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. If you love the Ganon Blights, that's fine. You can love the Ganon Blights. I'm not going to get on your back about it. Okay, I might get on your back about loving that every boss is a Ganon Blight, but still. You know, these are just issues I have with the game. Other people might think different issues are a higher priority. Other people might think that some of my issues aren't major issues at all. And that's fine. These are just issues that came to me and I was like, you know what, I don't like this about this game. Like, I love Breath of the Wild, and I love what it means for the series. But no matter what, I find myself looking at Breath of the Wild and hoping for what game comes next, rather than Breath of the Wild. Like, I don't want to play Breath of the Wild anymore, at all. I have no motivation to. But what I really want to see is where Breath of the Wild takes the series. Because every game in the Legend of Zelda series is a reaction to the past game. You know, what people said was wrong with the past game. It's a reaction to that. And Breath of the Wild was the reaction to Skyward Sword is too linear. Skyward Sword is too plot-heavy. There's so many cutscenes. It's all just a bunch of... You know, the whole world is full of cutscenes and story moving, and there's no exploration. There's no just running around having fun. And so they're like, let's make a game that's about running around, having fun, and exploring. So what I want to see is I want to see what Nintendo does with the next Legend of Zelda game, because we know it's going to be as open world as Breath of the Wild, but what will they do to flesh that world out more? What will they do to make the bosses more unique? What will they do to make the best Zelda game ever? Because I don't think Breath of the Wild holds that title. Because while Breath of the Wild feels like a great game, I would argue that it's less of a Zelda game than Skyward Sword, a game people often held as a great game, not a great Zelda game. And I feel like that's what Breath of the Wild is to me. It's a great game, but it's not a Zelda game. It doesn't feel Zelda enough. And I want to see what they do with the series to make a game as big and as venturous and as fleshed out as Breath of the Wild, but that is still a Zelda game at heart. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you sat through all of this, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. But anyways, I'm going to be saying that in the outro anyways. So, goodbye, everyone. Farewell. Hey, thanks for watching that video. If you want to see more of my content, there's a video on the left and a video on the right. Feel free to subscribe to my channel to check out more of my videos in the future as they come. Bye!